things I've never heard of before. Had a planishing iron. We had slip rolls. We had cornice brakes. You know, this is for bending sheet metal,
Yes.
cutting sheet metal in straight lines so that you could install it. And lathes and all sorts of gadgets, drill presses.
Okay, well, if you're ready, sir, we'll begin.
All right.
This is the 8th. My name is Kim Hobbs, and this is the 8th of September, 2007. Sir, what is your full name?
Walter A. Bjorklund,
When and where were you born?
Kalispell, Montana, May 19th, 1917.
Which squadron were you in?
58 Service Squadron.
What was life like in the United States during the Great Depression?
Well, it was pretty slim pickings. We lived on a subsistence farm, and there were 3 boys, and my stepmother and my dad, and we had 12 cows, and we grossed about $90 a month from selling whole milk to a cheese factory.
Do you think the hardships of the Depression helped strengthen you for the war?
Well, it helped strengthen me for my entire life. I don't act foolishly with money.
I understand that. Where were you and what were you doing when you heard that Pearl Harbor had been attacked?
I was on the 2nd floor of the big barracks building at McChord Air Force Base, Tacoma, Washington.
What level of education did you reach before you joined the military?
High school.
Why did you join the Army Air Force? And
Get off the farm.
when and where did you enlist?
I didn't enlist in the Air Force. They weren't taking people in 1936. I enlisted in the U.S. Army, 7th Infantry, which was at Vancouver Barracks, and I stayed there 3 years.
Vancouver Barracks was in?
Vancouver, Washington.
What was your boot camp experience like?
Our boot camp was considerably different than all people encountered during the war. They gathered up 8 men, new recruits, and they assigned them to a corporal in L Company. That was the company we were going to serve in. But they put us in a separate squad room with this corporal, and he raised us like his children for 6 weeks. And we went through all the stuff that they required for basic training, but they didn't try to kill us.
Well, that was certainly different than what the rest of them received.
It certainly is.
Where did you get your different levels of training?
Well, in the infantry, I stayed in the infantry for 3.5 years. When my first enlistment was up, I re-enlisted at Presidio, San Francisco. And shortly thereafter, was a notice went on the bulletin board that anyone in the high school education was encouraged to volunteer for the U.S. Air Corps. And so I did, and so did the 4 other high school graduates in the company. And we all got accepted, and on the 1st of September, we went to Hamilton Field then, California, which is north of San Francisco on the Marin County Peninsula. And 2 or 3 weeks later, I was sent to Scott Air Force Base to I forgot what the exact name was, but it's a screening school where we stayed for about 6 weeks, and they give us each a week of training in things like parachutes, engines, fuselages, hydraulics, propellers, radio, and so forth, to find which we were best aptitude, had the best aptitude for which subject.
Let's see. How did this training prepare you for real combat missions?
Didn't prepare me at all. I had to go to one of the basic schools first. I was selected to go to airplane and engine mechanics school at Chanute, where I stayed for 6 months. And then I was sent back to Hamilton Air Force Base, and I worked on B-17s for a month or so, and then they were open McCord Field, and in April 1940 I went up to McCord Field, and that was the start of my actual work as an airplane mechanic.
And McCord Field was
McCord
located?
Field,
It's
yes.
Located in which town?
Tacoma, Washington.
Now, you were what rank at this point?
Buck Private.
What rank did you achieve, sir?
Lieutenant Colonel.
And you were in for how many years?
31.
So your MOS or specialty in the military was?
Well, the biggest one was 4823. That was engineering officer. And I achieved that after I got a commission. I had another one as a warrant officer, and I had, of course, a different one when I was an enlisted man. I went through all those grades.
Having worked on the planes as you did, what would you consider the strengths and the weaknesses of a B-24?
Well, most of the weaknesses I have to get from talking to the pilots. They were boogers to fly formation with because they were so heavy on the stick. I forget which arm it is, but when they were flying formation, one of their arms just would start aching because they had to hold it all the time. They couldn't trim it so it would fly by itself. Now, you'll probably hear other people say different things, but the Air Corps decided to install a formation stick, and it was on the arm of the pilot seat, and it was about the size of my little finger. And what it did is it upset the autopilot so that if you wanted to move the airplane a little bit to the right, you just move the stick a little bit to the right. If you wanted to go up, you'd pull back on the stick. And you could do it with just like this. Yeah? And you were using the entire force of the AFCE, which is the system that worked the controls. And it would pull the cables, and the airplane would move gradually, and they could just fly perfectly. And they didn't have to hold on to that wheel until their arms were about to fall off. Weaknesses. Oh, we covered that. It was faster, hauled more bombs, and than a B-17. And I think it was just as good. It may not have been able to handle damage as well as the B-17. And I gathered that from the pictures that the 8th Fighter Bomber flew back from Germany, with the tails off and, just terrible wrecks. And we had a lot of them like that, but not near. I mean, you blew a tail off a B-24. I don't think you could bring it home because the tail was as big as this table.
Was there any differences in the engines of the B-17 and a B-24?
Well, the B-24 had Pratt and Whitney's, and the B-17s had Wright. The Wrights were single roll, and we had 14-cylinder double roll. Wrights are 9-cylinder. And the piston displacement was just a little bit greater on the B-24. We had about, on the later engines, about 1,300 horsepower each. And I couldn't tell you whether they flew, how much faster they flew, because I didn't do that sort of thing. But
You didn't have an opinion that one engine was more dependable than the other?
well, I don't think, when we were down in the desert, it didn't really make any difference, because you're sucking sand into them by the bucketfuls. They had big filters before before the air went into the supercharger. But they would fill up rather quickly, and then before you could get up off the runway, to altitude where there was no dust, the damage was done. We had a lot of quick engine changes that just tore them apart.
Was one any easier to work on than the other?
Well, I worked on both, and the B-17, of course, was a tail dragger, and the tricycle on the B-24 made it a little bit easier in some respects. The landing gear on a B-24, on a B-17, when we first started receiving them, was causing problems because it used electrical screw to raise and lower as opposed to a hydraulic cylinder. And the very close tolerances in that electrical screw, when you went to altitude and the temperature dropped, and it would bind in the gear, wouldn't go up or down. And we spent months taking those electrical screw things out, which were about 4 feet long, I guess, and about so big around. And we put them on a lathe and lapped them into the thing that acted as the nut, see, that went on the outside of the screw, and took down enough material so that the temperature differentials wouldn't bind them and they would continue to work. I'm sure the factory fixed that by the time I left the B-17 business, but the B-24 never had such a problem. Our men worked at McCord on B-17s. Actually, what we did was we did a lot of receiving. They came right down from the factory, and we took the spare parts out of it, checked make sure they had everything, did a thorough inspection of everything, that is, run everything that was to be run. And then we'd call up a test pilot, and he would come and take it up and do certain flight things with them, and then put them back down, and we'd put them back to, I'll put all the loose stuff back together in the airplane, and somebody from the receiving squadron would come and get it and take it home. When we went to overseas, the first B-24 I saw belonged to the 376. and the guys didn't know anything about them. But fortunately, our equipment, our OEL equipment that was issued, was suitable for it. The jacks worked under the wings, you know, everything worked like it should. We had engine work stands, and they fit. We even had cold winter stuff, big canvas canopies that would go over the engines, and then we had ground heaters. They were like gasoline heaters that would heat so that you could, if you were in Alaska or someplace like that, you could work on them in sub-zero weather. The B-17, of course, would have had the same thing. I would say they were about the same.
It's said that there are no atheists in the foxholes. To what degree did your experience in the military or in combat affect your religious faith?
I don't think it did at all. The Air Corps had air superiority every place I was, and we did not have any, I never crawled in a foxhole. I didn't have to. I thought that was pretty good.
Did your reasons for first joining the military, drafted patriotism, adventure, or whatever, change over time during the war?
No. I rather liked it. I mean, I loved the airplanes. I mean, they were fun to work on. And it was better than walking behind an old plow with two horses, shoveling manure.
Did you receive any medals?
Yeah, not medals of merit or of honor or anything of that nature. I got 3 or 4 good conduct medals, not good conduct medals, commendation medals. And of course, you got service medals for every field or every theater that you served in. Well, I had a whole bunch of ribbons when I came home, or when I retired, I should say. But I didn't have any Purple Hearts, or I didn't have any Medals of Honor, or Silver Stars, or anything like that.
How close were you with the crew that you worked with?
About as close as you can get. I had an unusual career in that sense. At McCord, I went up there from Hamilton, and I'd just come out of mechanics school, a buck private. And they had an organization called Materiel Squadron they put us in, and it actually was base maintenance was what it was. We had a big hangar, 100 yards square, and we took care of all of the third echelon maintenance. That what took more than 24 hours to do. In our squadron, there were probably 300 men, and about 150 of them were mechanics and related skills. And I got up there in April 1940, and I was promoted to private first class, and then when I graduated from school, I was promoted to air mechanic second class, and then I was air mechanic first class, and then I was staff sergeant, and then I was tech sergeant. And on the 1st of October, 1942, I was appointed Warrant Officer JG, all in the same squadron. Now, the policy was that when you got an officer category, you were transferred out of the organization so that I would not have problem with people who I didn't like in the squadron and maybe had fist fights with, over the years. Well, I hadn't had any. So they appointed me in another squadron, on another base. And my squadron commander said, I didn't know he was doing this, but he went and to Service Command Headquarters at Wright-Patterson, says, I want Berkland here. We trained him here, and we were going to use his skills here. So I stayed there. I went overseas with that group. And here's the same guys that we were buck privates together, and I was an officer, and they were corporals or stuff. And when we got to Benghazi, were all these guys that we had been with from 1940. See? So it was 3 years. We'd all worked together for 3 years. And that stayed that way until December of 43. We had moved with the bomb group, actually a month or so later, to San Pancrazio, Italy, and we're still in the same bunch of guys. Well, they split the squadron there in half, but went up to Cerignola to be with the 4th Bomb Group, and the other half stayed at San Pancrazio. But I still was with these guys. Well, I made chief warrant officer, and then I made second lieutenant, and then I made first lieutenant. They did it again. They said they transferred me to another organization, and when I made second lieutenant, and the group commander this time, I knew what he was doing, and he got me transferred back to the squadron. So I stayed the whole war with the same basic bunch of guys that I started out with. So you can't get much closer than that.
That is an amazing story.
Yeah.
Who was your commanding officer?
The last one I had in overseas was I got a blank. I got a picture of him.
After being over there for 3 years, I'm sure he knew your name and knew your face.
Oh yeah, his Can you shut that thing off for a minute?
Oh, that's okay. You'll think of it.
I can't. I got a blank. I'm sorry.
Sure, that's all right. What was the discipline and the regulations like over there in North Africa and Sanpan?
Oh, sort of school ground style. There were no uniform regulations. The guys could wear anything that they could stand to put on them because of the weather. Mm-hmm. You know, we were in the Sahara Desert there. During the day it was 130, and at night it would drop to 40. You know, God, I don't know how it got so cold at night. So some people went around with a pair of shorts on, and nothing else, and some people wore a coat and tie. I wasn't one of those either.
There wasn't a lot of saluting going on?
Not on the flight line. Around the camp, yes. In town, yes. But around the flight line, the officers and the men just behaved like comrades.
What was a work day? How many hours did you put in during a normal?
Mostly daylight to dark. In the summer, it was longer than in the winter. The
How many days a week did you?
7,
7 days a week.
no holidays. Actually, the bomb group missions controlled everything. And of course, they got up at an ungodly hour at night and had their breakfast, and then they went to briefing, and then they went down and pre-flighted their airplanes, and then they started them up, and it takes quite a while, you know, to round up about, each squadron had about 15 airplanes, and if they got 10 or 12 of them out every day, they were lucky. And it took a long time for 4 groups, there were about 40 to 60 airplanes to get lined up on the runway and take off. And on our particular field, well, for the year and a half that I was in Italy, of course I wasn't with the 376, but I was with another B-24 bomb group. And I'm speaking from that experience now. It took a long time because we had 2 parallel runways, and we had the 455th here and the 454th here. And by the time you got those 2 groups lined up and out of there, you know, it was daylight. And they would go fly around for 8 hours or so and drop their bombs and scurry back and land, and then they go debrief and eat supper and go to bed, and then they were up again at 2 o'clock in the morning. So that people that worked on the ground couldn't complain.
What did you do for recreation if you had a few hours to yourself?
Well, about the best thing there was to do was to, when we were in North Africa, was to go around and look at the wreck stuff that Rommel and Montgomery had left after their trips back and forth across the desert. When we first got there, we were there a week, and we had 60 motorcycles in the squadron, all sizes you ever see. You know, BMWs to Fiats with little cylinders about like this, and a great big old BMW sidecar with drive shafts and everything. And we had them about a month, I guess, and they took them away from us. But they made their own amusement. One chap found a Renault sedan. They call them Renaults now. But he worked on it for a couple of months and got it all ready to go. Had taken the engine completely apart, put it back together. And one night he finished with his work on it, spare time. He wasn't working on it full time. And he went to his tent, and the next morning he came out, and somebody had started it and it seized up in about, you know, with no oil in just a couple of minutes, and ruined all his work. Anyway, they came and took him away from us, so it didn't make any difference. But they made us, all these fellows made us much, they played cards, they did sightseeing, as I said. And when we were in Benghazi, you could almost spit in the Mediterranean from where we were.
If you like swimming there, it was.
like, if you like to swim, yeah.
What was it like watching the planes come back with the battle damage?
Disheartening sometimes. The count, everybody counted the airplanes coming back. And that was the first obvious thing. And then the rest of it was when they got them on the ground, how many ambulance had to go around and pick up the wounded out of the airplanes. And it was grave. It wasn't pleasant at all.
Did you write letters home during the war?
Almost every day. My wife wrote to me every day, and I wrote every time I could.
I understand some of the mail was censored. What could you write home about?
Well, our mail wasn't censored because we had to censor the enlisted men's mail. And you couldn't write about what you were doing. You couldn't write about where you were. You couldn't write about anything that would aid the enemy in finding out exactly where you were, exactly how bad your equipment or how good your equipment was or how effective your job was going, and things of that nature. You talk about personal things, things at home, children if you had them, whatever.
How often could you receive letters from home?
Well, it wasn't a matter of could, but once we got stabilized in North Africa, and then after we got stabilized in Italy, the mail got pretty regular, but there was a time when it was over a month before we got mail. I don't know what happened. I think they put it on a freighter, and the freighter went around the world.
Do you remember where you were or what you were doing when the news of the victory in Europe in May of '45?
Yeah, I was at San Giovanni, Italy, which is about 5 miles west of Cerignola. And we were listening to the radio. By that time, Armed Forces radio was pretty good, and everybody had a radio out of a B-24 in their tent. Well, all the officers did. And we got, the Signal Corps had little speakers, that would go with those, just plug them in. And we had better radios than I'd ever had in my life, because we had all the, every kind of radio that was ever, if you kept turning the dial, you could pick up everything in the world.
Do you remember hearing the news of victory in Japan?
Do I remember hearing?
Where were you when you heard the news of victory in Japan?
I was home with my wife, and I was on 30-day rest and recuperation, pending going to, I was going to say a recycling center, but that's exactly what it was, Sioux Falls, South Dakota, for a reassignment to the South Pacific, when they announced that they had surrendered,
How long had you been overseas when you got to go back for 30 days?
2.5 years. So I went over in February of 43, and I came home in late July 45, I guess, just about the 1st of August I got home. Actually, it was 29.5 months I was overseas.
Do you consider yourself to be a hero because of your service in World War II?
No. The Patriot, yeah.
At the end of the war, did you take advantage of the GI Bill?
No.
You were already married?
No, I stayed in the service, and I was afraid I'd have to go back on a farm.
You really didn't like walking behind the plow, did you?
Yeah, I sure did.
What was the makeup of a typical ground crew? How many men? What sort of ranks?
They had a crew chief, and he was usually a staff sergeant, and he would have about 4 men. And they, if they needed more men, they would take another crew and put it on, and use 2 crews on the airplane. And then, of course, they had inspectors that went around and checked every bit of work that's done by everybody. Not that they didn't trust them, but it's so easy to forget to twist safety wires. I mean, such little things can cause such monstrous accidents.
Do you remember any accidents that occurred while you were over there?
Do I remember accidents? Not from maintenance problems or negligence or anything like that, but accidents, I should say so. I have a book full of them there. That was my really main business, was all the airplanes that were unrepairable had to be disposed of, and the service squadron had to do it.
How many planes did a ground crew maintain at one time?
Oh, they worked on one job till it was finished, and they went to another airplane. See, the airplanes all belong to the bomb squadrons, and if it had something wrong with it, it took more than 24 hours to fix. They literally transferred the airplane to us. That was so that the in-commission rate for the group wouldn't be unrealistic. They just got rid of the airplane that wasn't working couldn't be made to work in 24 hours.
Did you ever interact with the flyers or the crew members of the plane?
We didn't mix with them very much. We didn't keep the same hours. See, they were, for the most part, they were gone during the day, and they would sleep during the night. And when they had time off, like they had downtime, they would load them in the truck. And I'm relating to up in Cheragnola now, and they would. I just remember my commander officer's name was John C. McGinnis, Major John C. McGinnis.
They would come.
Popped up.
There you go.
Yeah, I had it stashed. Anyhow, they load them in a truck and they go down to the beach and swim, or they'd go to little Italian towns, and scrounge around. But the problem was the Italians were all starving to death, and so there was nothing but beggars. Everybody they wanted your shoes, they wanted your cigarettes, they wanted your chocolate, and it was that was a little painful because you felt sorry for them, but there wasn't anything you as an individual could do, really, except spoil them a little bit by giving them a chocolate bar, and then they were without again.
You mentioned the weather and the damage that the sand did in North Africa. Were there any other problems that you had to deal with, like shortage of parts?
Always a shortage of parts. No matter how many parts they sent over, there was always something that would cause problems. In North Africa, the biggest single thing were generators and those carbon pile voltage regulators that went with them. And then the engines themselves, of course, sucking in all that sand. And they would go out on a mission, you know, and they'd get about halfway out and they'd start overheating, and their compression had just disappeared, you know. The engine wasn't performing properly. So they had to turn around and come back and change the engine, or change engines.
Did they overhaul the engines there at Benghazi, or did you ship them out someplace?
We shipped them out. They had an engine overhaul downtown Benghazi. I never saw it, and to be honest, the bomb group didn't want any of those engines. They wanted new engines from Pratt & Whitney. And I can't blame them, because they used a lot of native labor, and that was end of the answer there.
Well, that's why my father referred to the shoeshine boys that called themselves mechanics in Benghazi. So that's native labor. I'd heard that before.
Well, the British called them wogs, wily Oriental gentlemen.
That's what Kipling called them. Did you ever have any USO shows through there?
Yes. If you call Jack Benny a USO show. I got pictures up there. He came just before the Ploesti raid on the 1st of August, 1943. And at that particular moment in time, I wasn't with the 376 Bomb Group, I was with the 389th Bomb Group, which was flown down for the purpose of this raid. They took the ball turret out of the bottom of the airplane, and they put some, filled half the bomb bay with extra gas tanks to extend the range. And they were going to fly low level, and so they didn't need a ball turret. I mean, they were going to shoot anything, you know, with a belly gun. So, and that took about 600-800 pounds out of the airplane. And Jack Benny showed up out at this 389th Bomb Group, and they named an airplane after him, and he wrote notes to Hitler on the bombs with chalk. And it was a media frenzy. I got some of the pictures. That was the only USO show, but that was for only over about a 6 months period. See, I was in Benghazi. And then when we got up to Italy, they routinely went from base to base around the 15th Air Force. So the 376 got them as well as all the other groups.
Do you remember any other celebrities? Did you get any more autographs?
I don't remember, no. Jack Benny was one of my favorites. That's how I remembered him. But most of the USO shows, never saw Bob Hope. Never saw Red Skelton. Most of them were minor people, you know. But they were good shows. I mean, they were skilled and talented artists.
Well, you mentioned how it was grim seeing the battle damage
Yeah.
when the planes came back. Is there any memory that you have that makes you smile when you think about it? What was your funniest memory that you can recall?
Those, no, I can't remember anything that was funny about the airplanes that came back. Nothing.
Was there any episodes with your crew that you had one particular person that you stayed in touch with maybe, or was your closest friend?
No. Maybe it was my fault, but a lot of them got out at the end of the war, and I didn't get out for reasons that I've already told you. I didn't want to go back to the farm.
Well, if you were wanting to sum this episode up for some high school kid popping this disc into his VCR player, would you have a message that you would wish to pass along for your episode, your career in the military, what it means to you and being a part of this 376?
Well, I don't think you can make better friends than your buddies, the people that you live and work with, because each guy relies on the other one. And if you want to get into a walk of life that has good retirement, you get in the military. All the corporations now have cut out pensions, and you have to buy your own retirement plans, except military and civil service. It was a gratifying career, and I enjoyed every minute of it, and except some. And I have a grandson, graduated from the academy a couple of years ago, and he's just finishing up his training as an F-15 pilot. And you're going to cut me off right there, huh?
No, sir. You can go.
And I'm starting to gas. No, it's
With your career in the military, when you see planes aloft, is there a favorite one that just
oh, sure.
takes you back to better days?
And the airplanes that they have now are so different than the B-24s. You know, the sound of a C-130, you know, that's that turboprop
Yes.
transport, and they fly right over my house. See, I'm just about 5 miles north of Peterson Field, or Peterson Air Force Base. And they go over the boom, 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 you know, those old 4 turboprops.
Yeah.
And they sound much like a B-24 did. Shake the whole tiles on the roof and everything.
My father used to talk of the difference between a needle prop and a paddle prop.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
There's, depends on the RPM of the engine. Some of them are, you got blades on them, you know, like that, and some of them are like a,
And what year were you discharged out of the military?
1967. I've been retired 40 years.
Never did go back to walking behind the plow?
Yeah, I did. My parents died, and they'd sold off all the land except 2 acres, but the house and a shed and orchard was still there. And I kept it 15 years and planted a garden out there and trimmed up all the trees. He hadn't trimmed them in 40 years himself. You know, they were, I mean, you couldn't really pick the fruit off of them. So I cut them down to size, and I was getting nice, I sprayed them and so I got nice apples and cherries. But that was sort of a hobby after I retired. I worked 10 years for the Highway Department of Washington State after I retired. Because I was only 50 when I retired. So that made me 60, a little closer to Social Security.
Well, we thank you for your time, sir, and for your service for this country.
Yeah. Now,
Do you have any?
can I get any of these discs?
Yes, sir. We'll make a copy available to you.
I'd like 3 of them if I can.
All righty.
I want to get in. See, come on, Walton, and we get in the Jeep and we go down to Charagnola. This is not in the 376. This was. See, I spent a year and a half with them. I'm 36 months with the 376 and a year and a half with the 454. And we go down and play poker with a commander of the service group, Colonel Rankin. And the service group had 4 service squadrons and a whole bunch of signal corps detachments and quartermaster detachments, and we had about 3,000 men in addition, which was in addition to the bomb groups, you know, all their men. So,
So were there like between 40 and 50,000 on your men on your base?
well, on the base at San Pancrazio, I couldn't tell you how many we had there because I wasn't there long enough. I got there Thanksgiving Day. I was on a 43. I was on the LST going to Toronto from Cape Bon, and they took us out to San Pancrazio, and in December I went up to the 454th. But the 454th had 2 bomb groups and 2 service squadrons and all the cats and dogs, you know, the signal corps and the ordnance and the motor truck companies and all that stuff that we even had an oxygen plant. You want out of that?
Yeah, we'll just hold it up and he'll zoom in on it. If you'll just hold it up there in front of you, hold it still. So the man with the officer's cap is Mr. McGinnis?
Yeah. That was the service squadron staff.
Okay, got it.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Well, I thank you for your trouble. I'm sorry I wasn't a very good actor, but that is not my profession. I'm better with